Hey everybody, welcome back to the How Did It Happen podcast. I'm your host, Mike Malatesta. I'm an entrepreneur who's founded and led 2 8-figure companies. I'm also an investor, author, speaker, and lifetime learner. On this podcast, I explore stories of success in every episode and with every guest. What it means, why it's important, and of course, how it happens. You can subscribe, connect, and learn more about me at mikemalatesta.com. Today, I'm fulfilling my promise to you with another amazing success story. Jeroen Corthout joins me on the podcast. Jeroen is the co-founder of Salesflare. Salesflare is a simply powerful CRM that automates your data to build better relationships and make more sales. But that's not what's so great about this podcast. What's so great about this podcast is Jeroen's unique story. He's an entrepreneur's entrepreneur. He started working on things when he was in high school, working with cell phones and doing some other cool stuff. And he's going to tell you all about that and how he's got this unique perspective on not having a plan B, because he says that if you don't feel the pain, you won't feel the gain. Jeroen, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's really good to have you here. You're joining us from Belgium, I believe, and first person that I've had on my podcast from Belgium. So I don't know if that's special or not, but it is to me.
More Belgians.
Well, maybe this will be the start of having more Belgians on, because it's the great thing about the pandemic is I've been able to take my podcast global, in a way that I never had thought about prior. And you're probably doing the same thing with yours, and I'll talk to you about that later. But anyway, I'm really excited. I've been looking forward to this for a while, and I start every one of my shows with the same simple question: how did it happen for you?
How did what happen exactly?
Oh, well, see, that's the thing. It's whatever you want it to be. So tell us a story about how you became who you are.
How I became who I am. I think it most of it starts with my parents. My dad is an engineer, of the sort of fanatic kind. I would say he's this kind of guy that when he was a kid he would write for the school paper a little essay about how computers were going to change the world when everybody else was like, okay. So you know,
Yeah.
yeah, he and had his wedding, and he's somehow proud of that. They had made a thing for him. He was called the digital guy, and they had branded him like that and stuff. My mom, on the other hand, is a bit of an somehow opposite personality, or not completely. She's an architect. She's mainly when I was a kid, she was doing a lot of windmills in churches. Funny business, but she was working in a company that did mainly this kind of stuff. She has been doing lots of houses since then as well. At some point, she started working for herself, and apartment buildings. And lately, this kind of, I think she's making a practice now for an organization that takes care of autistic kids. She's sort of at the end of her work, let's say. But I think I'm personally very much a blend of my parents. I really like building stuff. I understand the technical aspect of stuff. That's probably the two coming together. But where I'm maybe build up some frustrations with how my dad is and stuff. I always liked more to make it concrete, to build it for people, not necessarily excited about the technical aspect by itself, but more like what it can be for people. And when I was a kid, I always liked to build whatever, whether it was a catapult or a camp in the woods or whatever, the latest, or creating something and like drawing something, or creating a thing in whatever, in Lego Technic or in Knex or Kapla or all this kind of stuff they had back in the day,
Okay.
or just out of nothing. But the first moment that comes closest to what I do today is when I was 15, 16. I had been playing with GeoCities websites for a while. I don't know whether you remember those, but it was this kind of very entry level sort of websites. You could say the Wix of back then,
Okay.
but
That helps me.
yeah,
Yeah, thank you.
yeah, but way more basic. It was this kind of stuff where you had some text, and then you could make a little menu, and then you can have like some animation, very basic stuff, and a counter at the bottom always to count how many
Oh,
people join your website.
you're the so and so visitor to this site
Yeah,
or something? Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And that sort of got me excited for websites. First, I created this GeoCity stuff, and at some point, I discovered like how you could make them in HTML and CSS. Were very basic back then. If you wanted to create anything cool, you had to use Flash. So I learned Flash, and I started building websites mainly in Flash, with some HTML and CSS around it, but that didn't really come into play. And I built one first for myself, and then I built one for my mom, like showcasing some of her projects. And then I started building a bit more widely. And at that point, I saw myself becoming a web designer and having a web design company. And that's sort of where it started for me, like thinking, okay, I can take my interest in building stuff, my technical background, and do something for people. And when I went studying, actually, I always knew I was going to become an engineer. At some point, I thought that I was going to become the driver that takes the train under the
Oh,
tunnel, like
conductor?
from Belgium, France to the UK. That seemed really cool to me at some point.
Yeah. It
But
does seem
after
cool.
that, excuse me?
I said that does seem cool. That would be a cool job.
Yeah, well, at that age, it seems cool.
Yes.
Right now, it seems pretty boring, but at that age, I thought that was the coolest thing.
Yeah.
Um, but from there, I think I always was raised with the idea I was going to become an engineer. So in my mind, it started becoming computer engineering because I thought, well, I'm going to have this web design company, right? I better learn more programming and all that. Now, when I went to the open day of engineering, it didn't really click. There were the people showcasing stuff, and they seemed kind of nerdy. And what they were showcasing wasn't much better. It seemed so detached from the actual world that I didn't really feel it. So I ended up choosing for electronical engineering, which seemed way more interesting to me, which was quickly combined with business management as a minor. And then actually that was the bachelor. I was in the first year that it's in the Europe the bachelor master program. In my master, I did biomedical engineering because I was basically given a choice between things like telco and microcircuits and energy. And the fourth option was biomedical engineering, which seemed way more interesting because I could make a much bigger impact. Plus, I could learn way more because then I also had all these medical courses, which was super, super cool. From there, in the meantime, I had a little cell phone business where I would buy cell phones mainly in the UK and in Germany, and I would resell them in Belgium and make a little money on it. It was nice. It was actually more of a hobby than it was a business because I just like phones.
Okay.
And if I had a cool one, I would stick to my hands, and then I would sell my old one. And actually, to this day, I still sort of have my system where I never buy new phones because it just doesn't make sense to splurge that much money on them. I decide what I want. I keep tracking secondhand websites, and when somebody sells it for too little money, I buy it, and then I sell my old one for a bit more. And that way I never really spend much money on cell phones. Because it's also such a commodity. It's not like it's just cell phone and you reprogram it and it works, right? The only thing might be the battery, but usually the rest is okay. And then from there, it was hard because I studied engineering and I got offered all these engineering jobs. Or first I got offered a potential PhD because I made a master's thesis and got to present it at a conference and won a prize and all this kind of stuff. But I definitely didn't want to do that. I didn't want to go in research. Also, engineering jobs seemed kind of detached from the world. So I would be like behind a computer creating stuff, but never really in touch with customers, which didn't appeal to me. And after applying to a bunch of those jobs, in one of the interviews, they said, well, if you don't want to do that, maybe you should be a project manager. And I said, yeah, that might be much more interesting. And then they made me do a test to test my project management skills. And after the test, I decided I was not a good project manager, so I was not going to be a good fit. And that evening, I was so frustrated that I applied for business school. My parents were totally against it because they thought, well, you need to go get a job next year. We're definitely not going to pay for business school. But then I got in. I didn't tell them that I applied. I told my dad at some point. Then I got in. I offered to pay it myself, and I did it. And that actually made that I could completely switch my career from the start, because I didn't start in an engineering job. I actually started in a marketing job in pharma, which is completely different. So I studied biomedical engineering. That's the only link. But apart from that, it was marketing. And that was because I figured this was the best way to learn how to start my own company. Because in that role, I could put a product in the market, interact with people, see how that all worked, work out marketing plans. And now the job I took was not at all what I expected. It was more of a very operational sort of marketing, where I learned how to make a brochure, which is cool. And then teach the salespeople how to use it and this kind of things. But it wasn't that really like putting a thing in the market kind of thing that I expected it was going to be. So I didn't do that for long. I looked for companies to start. And one of the most obvious ideas I had a bunch, was starting a web design company again, but then for pharma companies. Because I figured after a little stint in pharma that these people had really no idea how to design websites. Thing is that in pharma companies, the marketers are usually ex-salespeople, because the marketing job at that point, at least, had always been to support the salespeople. It had never been really about marketing by itself, because the main channel through which pharma companies access doctors, mainly doctors, also other stakeholders, is salespeople. So marketing is a sales support job rather than something else. So these people really had no idea about websites, and I thought, well, I know pharma and marketing, and I know websites, so that could be cool.
Yeah.
And then I actually discovered that somebody I had dinner with someone from my neighborhood, which I knew something about this, to ask him for advice, and he ended up hiring me. He said, well, if you start this, it's not going to work because you're young and nobody's going to believe you, but you can join us and we'll teach you everything. And if you want to leave after 6 months, you do whatever you like. So I did that. I ended up staying more than 6 months. I ended up staying 4 years. That was a great job. I was in a marketing consultancy for pharma industry, where we helped them basically to adapt to the new world, where things don't all go through salespeople anymore, but there's actually the internet, and doctors can go look up stuff there, patients can go look up stuff there, pharma companies can reach the doctors through the internet, all those kind of things. And I was an account manager there, and I learned everything from making budgets, actually listening to people first, listening to their problems, coming up with solutions, figuring out how to do that, making a budget, making a project plan, splitting that all up, making a proposal, getting people internally to work on it, getting external people to build parts of it, that whole thing. I learned so much, and then next to all the technical aspects of all that during that job, which is really helping me in my job today. I would say it's a lot of small stuff that I learned there. I started off with a really small sort of quota because I was the youngest account manager there, and they were just giving me an opportunity, but not really believing that I would make a lot of sales, which grew to quite a large budget after a while. I was one of the top selling account managers at some point. But in the meantime, I always wanted to do my own thing. So I switched to part-time consulting at some point, which is something I can recommend to everyone who wants to start his own business. You have this nice revenue stream on the one side, and on the other side, you have time to try different things and fail a few times without failing too hard, let's say.
Yeah, sure. You got a backstop. Yeah. You have a backstop sort of thing.
Yeah. This has pros and cons, of course. The pro is that you don't fail too hard, which you will inevitably do. If you succeed the first time you start a company, kudos to you, but it's probably not going to happen. On the other hand, of course, having a plan B can also be a stopper on you because you don't feel the pain as much. But I would argue that it's the managing the risk is probably more interesting than making sure you're motivated. So I worked part-time, I think, for a year and a half at that company before I decided to completely quit. I started a few things. First thing I started was a sort of, let's say, wait for doctors to keep up with the latest research without them having to follow every single journal and stuff. It's more like a feed reader or so for doctors where they could indicate what they were interested in, and I would then surface the most interesting research based on what they were interested in. A very big.
So is that is that like a aggregator of articles and stuff? Is that kind of what it is?
Yeah. It's so the issue is doctors are the single biggest audience for research that are not researchers. But the thing is that they are not very, very specific. They're often a bit more wide, so they cannot just follow one journal, subscribe to it, and know everything they need to know. It doesn't work like that. So the whole system is not really designed for them. It's designed for the researchers. So the researchers feeding the researchers. So for doctors, what they rather do is like, okay, I'm this kind of doctor, and I'm also interested in this and this and this and this. They want to be able to indicate that. And then the issue also is that they don't have a lot of time to spend there. They cannot read every single thing. So they want to read the most interesting stuff. And I then devised some kind of thing which worked a little bit like Google to surface the most interesting things. And that way I could keep them up to date in the easiest way. Now, the issue with that was that not that it wasn't serving a need, was that I didn't really think through the business model. And this is nice if you're based in California, more specifically in Silicon Valley, and there's lots of people around you that are of the belief that you don't need to have a business model at the start, and then you just throw some millions at you. And that's a sort of a belief that you start having, that the whole world works like that when you follow the press a little.
Yeah, right.
But it's definitely not how the whole world works. Especially where I am in Belgium, we have this very European risk-averse mentality. So the chance of this happening is close to zero. So you need to have a business model from the start, and I didn't have a clear one, which made it really hard to get it off the ground. It even made it really hard to find a co-founder who wanted to develop it with me. And in the end, I ended up developing it myself, which then distracted me of all the rest. And yeah, it was just doomed to fail at that point.
And that was Doctura. Is that the name of the company?
Yeah, that was Doctura.
Okay.
The company itself is still alive, but in a totally different form. It's now sort of my management company, which I organize my finances. But
Oh, so it's just something you're using now, or it's something that you're selling? A different.
No, the entity, just
Yeah. Okay.
the software itself doesn't exist anymore.
So what is the Silicon Valley equivalent in Belgium? Is there any sort of place where there is more of a, or less of a risk averse, sort of more of a unicorn type mentality, or is it just difficult everywhere in Belgium or Europe for that matter to get traction on a new idea that's not proven?
If you're pre-revenue, it's probably very hard in the whole of Europe to raise funding.
Okay.
It depends a bit of what, like, if you're in Belgium and you have a biotech company, then things might be different for several reasons. We have a lot of tax breaks for this kind of stuff. It's very active when it comes to biotech, and there's a lot of funding available. And this is sort of, biotech is more of the sort of binary bets where they throw a lot of money at you, and it might return a ton, and it might not return anything. Mm-hmm. There it might work, but if you have a software business, it's definitely not like that. If you have had a previous successful company, you might have some chance of having some business angels and maybe the government fund or something, if they all gang up to give you some money. But as a first-time entrepreneur, for sure, your chances are close to zero. The best place to find money at that point is subsidies. In Flanders, which is the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium, and actually in general in Europe in general, we have a quite good subsidy system for innovation. And you can write a file and then get subsidized. For instance, we did a first subsidy for a feasibility study, and then we did a further subsidy for developing a part of our system and building up knowledge. And as long as it's innovative, as long as it's not just an app that you build, but some sort of technology, it is subsidizable. And that's probably the best way of getting funding out of the normal investment circuit. Banks are also way cheaper than in the US, as far as I can understand. Like, for instance, we have bank loans at 2%. I don't know what exactly is in the US, 2% interest on a yearly basis. Yeah. But I understand it's way more.
Yeah, it's higher than that, for sure.
And this is already the sort of risky loans. The less risky loans are way below that at this moment. For instance, it's the loans they put out for Corona are fixed at 2%. So risky loans.
So if you take a subsidy or you get a subsidy, do you still keep the intellectual capital and everything that's developed during it, so the government doesn't have it's more like a grant or something where there's no connection to it afterwards for what's developed?
It's more like a grant. Well, I mean, I'm going to speak for most of the subsidies. There are some places, like I know they made this, the government funds here made some sort of loan, which is, how can you say, it's very close to capital, but it's also convertible into capital when they want it. But that's the exception to the case. Most of them are don't touch your capital at all. They're really more like grants. Yeah.
Okay. And I want to back up a second to when you were sort of deciding which engineering program you were going to go into. You sort of described what seemed to me to be like an interview process of some sort where you met with the computer engineers and you met with the electrical engineers. And so did I get that right? Where it was sort of a way for you to sort of meet these different groups and decide what you liked or not? That's what I thought I heard.
It's like an open day. So there's the university campus, and most of the departments have different buildings. And you go around and you go into this building, and then they showcase some stuff that they made. And then you go into the other building, and they show some stuff that they made. You know, it's mostly the PhD students showcasing things, and then that gives you a good idea of what to expect when you go do these studies. At least that's the idea of it.
Okay. And so when you started your first company, I'm just curious what your parents were thinking about that move, because you'd obviously been through a lot of schooling. You probably you did have many opportunities to have like a fixed career, like this is where I'm going to be, and then sky's the limit, I guess. And then you decide to start the software company and instead, which is a lot different than what they have done, at least if I understood you correctly. What was that like?
Uh, Good question. I think it was mixed. I think my dad was sort of relieved that somehow I was doing something with my engineering studies.
Okay.
Because I went into marketing before that, and then when I went a bit back, I think he was sort of happy about that. Because as context, my brother also studied engineering and sort of the same thing as me, but he's almost a partner at a big consulting firm now called A.T. Kearney. And my sister became a doctor, so also not an engineer. Uh, so you can feel my dad's frustration of trying to raise engineers and not having any. Um, on the other hand, they're quite supportive. Most of the things I've done, they support. I cannot say they were not a little worried, but in the beginning, I was doing it part time, and then at the moment that I made the switch, we had the backing of an accelerator with some money, and more things were coming. So I guess there was some momentum there. There's also, on the other hand, there's my wife, who is the daughter of an entrepreneur and who has gone through tons of ups and downs in her youth, with her dad having a lot of money and then no money, and then so for her it was not really easy to support it, but she still did it, because she saw how unhappy I was, not working for myself, not being able to take up responsibility, not building out something. Um, so she very much supported me through all of this, which I'm very grateful for.
And so how long, with Doctura, how long were you sort of going down the road with that company before you decided that like you said, the business model wasn't maybe completely thought out? I mean, how long was it before you were like, this isn't working? And what were you thinking when you made that determination about what you would do next?
I think 5-6 months or so. I started it within the Founder Institute. I started working it out there, and it was all very much of a flow. Like, because when you want to graduate from the Founder Institute, it's a sort of accelerator. You need to graduate with a company. Um, it was after that, I had the momentum from the Founder Institute still for a bit. I tried to push it. I um, I was looking for a way. I started coding, it's at some point 5-6 months in, I think, I don't remember the exact timing, I started becoming more and more less and less motivated, let's put it like that.
Okay.
It would, you know, the days that I would go to work, that would be fine. I was working part-time, right? So but then the other days it was a bit harder to get out of bed, to get myself moving again, because I didn't really see it going anywhere. And the way I stopped with it is a typical one in my case. I think I just replaced it with something else. At some point I was like, I'm going to make, which was another dumb idea, but I'm going to make a website for people going to the World Cup in Brazil, to help them to schedule a trip and to know how to do it and all this kind of stuff. And then I just started working on that, and I forgot about Doctura.
Okay. And then so how did that come together? That's interesting. So you it sounds like you were kind of knocked for a loop when you decided Doctora wasn't going to work, right? You're kind of maybe depressed a little bit or whatever, which is kind of natural, right? To like put a lot of work into this thing. It's not going to work. But what about this website? Did you get it off the ground? Did it actually become something? I mean, it sounds like a cool project at least.
Yeah, it was very nice. I learned a lot about Brazil. My wife is Brazilian, so she helped me also with understanding stuff. I learned a lot about setting up a blog and doing SEO and these kind of things. It was things I didn't really know much about. I had some basics somewhere, but so in that sense, it was very nice. I still use these things today. We do a lot of content marketing and blog things, etc. At Salesflare and SEO. The issue with that plan was that not that I didn't get traffic, and I did make some money on it from affiliate money from. Sorry, my dog is snoring. Some affiliate money from promoting, like, okay, so if you want to book your flight, you can do it like this and this, and then a link,
Yeah.
and you can make quite some money there, because the amount of money people spend on flights, and you get, I think I got 8% of that, which was pretty good. The issue was that the World Cup in Brazil, it had a definite moment, and after that, my site was dead.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I was thinking. Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. That was kind of an issue. It's not on a website which you build up and then it stays around. Like our blog at Salesflare, for instance, it gets constant traffic. It's something that you build up and then dies. And that was something I didn't understand when I started.
Okay. Speaking of dying, I wanted to back up to Flash. You were talking about Flash and how it's so what killed Flash? What was it that was, I know like even my first website had, I think everybody's first website had Flash, but why did it go away? What was
in very short, Apple.
Okay, so they didn't support
story,
it.
The amount of processing power needed to run Flash, and the things, the technology needed to install next to it. It's a bit like Java. Java runs everywhere if you have the runtime environment, but if you don't, then so Flash had to be installed everywhere. But mainly the main reason for Apple to start blocking it on its devices was that it was just too heavy. And what then really killed it was HTML5. So the same things, well, not the exact same things, because you could do anything in Flash, but a lot of the things that you would do in Flash have been replaced by HTML and JavaScript. And that just made that Flash was unneeded, not supported widely anymore. So it very quickly started being killed off. Okay. It took some years though to be completely killed off. But
well, thanks for that, because I knew it was gone, but I didn't know really, or largely gone, but I didn't know why. So I appreciate that. The Salesflare, which is your current company. Where did that come from in this sort of time frame? So you've got your, World Cup website. Doctura had sort of wound down, and you were. Where did Salesflare come from?
Yeah. Right after this, I first took part in a health startup weekend, where we actually won the startup weekend. It was a first health startup weekend of its kind in Belgium. Um, and we had devised a solution for nurses to more easily follow up on all the pacemakers of the people they were following, because they are from lots of different brands and the protocols are different and the sites on which you have to follow are different. And we made this thing where they can see it in one place, dashboard, initially by basically scraping the notification emails they would get. But then our goal was to then afterwards plug onto the APIs of these platforms and just bring it together. Um, when we won that startup weekend, um, there were some people involved from the government and some accelerators and funds and stuff. And they said, well, you should apply at this accelerator. And we did that. I think 2 weeks later, we had everything together. I prepared a deck and I prepared some stuff I already had from the startup weekend and turned it all into documents and send it in. We got invited to present. We presented and we were immediately accepted in the accelerator. And we were offered 50K as a convertible loan. And basically we were off to the races, at least in theory. Now, the reality was that we were a bunch of guys who met each other during a weekend and worked together to work out an idea. We were not really a team. And we all had our day jobs. Nobody was like all in for it. So despite us having 50K, it's sort of started to dabble. I was responsible for marketing. And that didn't go anywhere for a bit. At the same time, then my co-founder, who I had met in the Founder Institute when I was working on Doctura, he was working on something called Drop API, which never made it into existence because he was working on too many things at the same time.
Okay.
He had another company called Expo Plus, and he was going to go to a big conference in Vegas. It was the big yearly IBM conference. And his software was basically at a few software products. They were compatible with IBM's. And he had taken a booth there and was going to sell the software. There was some business intelligence guys joining, business intelligence software. They still needed someone who knew a bit more about sales. And he called me and he said, don't you want to join? And he said, well, I'll pay everything. Just stand there, sell it, and then we'll have fun. And I thought, oh, that sounds good. I was working part-time. I only had to take a few days off and then have a more or less vacation, work vacation, whatever.
Got it.
So we did that, and it was a big success. We managed to get a lot of leads at that conference. I always like when I go to a conference to actually make use of it. You know how you go to a conference and most people are standing behind their table and waiting for you to come. Right. I like to take the opposite approach and go into the hallway and say, hey, in this case, like our product was compatible with Cognos. So I would say, hey, do you use Cognos? And they would say, yes. And I was like, oh, cool. Well, we have this kind of things, how you can have this issue and that issue with Cognos. And they're like, yeah, I understand we have that issue. And I'm like, oh, we have a solution for that. And then show them the solution and stuff. I didn't know much about it. I just knew enough for that. And then they would have some technical question and I would say like, well, I don't know this exactly, but this guy here can help you. And then when I offloaded them to one of the other guys and I would go to the next one. And like that, we really had a really good flow at the booth. We had a lot of leads. But then in the end, well, we were very excited because we had so many leads. But then we had to close those deals. And we decided to work on that together. I decided to stopped my involvement in that company that made the thing for the pacemakers. I decided to stop my blog also. It was dead anyway. And go work on that. So my 2 days a week that I had at that moment, not working for the consultancy, I would work on Expo Plus. And that's actually where Salesflare started, because we didn't find any great way to have a system to properly follow up our leads. You would think that's what CRMs are for. And yes, sales CRMs are mostly built for the purpose of organizing your sales follow-up, at least nowadays. They have evolved from more like these database systems to a little bit practical systems. But the issue we always found is that we couldn't keep up with the system. We couldn't continuously update it with all the information it needed, because to do it successfully, you need to fill out everything in the CRM. You need to fill out every new person you meet. Every time they share contact details with you, it needs to go in there. Every single thing you do needs to go in there. You email them, you call them, you meet with them, you whatever. It all needs to go in there. Any information you find on the side needs to go in there. So you research, and then you just basically copy a lot of stuff in the CRM. And social media things. On the side, we had email tracking running, and that wasn't connected, and website tracking wasn't connected. It was like a big mess where we were copying over a lot of data all the time. We just couldn't keep up. And we figured most people can't keep up. But we also figured that a bit from our background of bringing data together in business intelligence, is that most of the data we were inputting into that CRM was already somewhere. We just had to build a system that would pull it together, make sure that it was already more or less organized, still ask the user to accept or reject some suggestions so that they could keep control over stuff, and still give them the ability to manually change things. But we figured that a CRM that would work automatically by design, and then have still the control of the old style manual CRMs, that would make a huge difference, because then we didn't have to spend all our time on that data input anymore. Computers are way better at keeping stuff up to date, are way more complete, way more consistent. Our discipline is not the issue anymore at that point. That was an issue we had beginning of 2014. And very quickly we understood that it was actually fixing CRM, which is the biggest enterprise software market in the world. And we figured that's worth spending our time on. And we started focusing on that more than on the business intelligence stuff we were doing in the past. And that's now what we've been doing for almost, I think, exactly 7 years now.
Okay. So I got a bunch of questions here. So you mentioned some of what I call the pain points of CRM, particularly from a sales rep's perspective, right? The number one, and this is my experience, yours might be different. So if so, you tell me. But my experience is, we, as a company owner or sales manager or whatever, we want CRM because we want to make sure that we have access to the data and we can track activity and do all these things. From a salesperson's perspective, there's often this disconnect where, so great for you, you want all this information, but what about me? What's it actually doing for me? And so automatically you get this sort of wall of, you want it, and I can actually even see why you want it. I'm the salesperson. You want it. I can see why you want it as the owner or sales manager. But for me, all I'm doing is twice the work now, because I'm emailing someone and then you want me to take the email and put it in the CRM, or that kind of thing. Am I on the right track there with?
No, that's one of the best descriptions I ever heard. Yeah, that's how it is.
And so you see that, right? And you I think you even used, I mean, you had experience with Salesforce, I think I read, and there's a bunch of different CRM, Salesforce being probably the one that's most recognizable from a name standpoint. But so it's sort of this weird thing where everybody wants a CRM and there's a lot of CRMs to get, but then how do you actually make a CRM that satisfies both sides of that equation? Because it seemed to, like, for me, we used NetSuite, and NetSuite has a CRM component to it. But it was always just really, really hard to get, universal adoption. And then even universal adoption was never universal. It was really unless you were really, you spent all your time saying, get the stuff in the CRM. And if you didn't do that, you got what you got. Like, so how do you, so it was very frustrating. For both sides, not just for one side, for both sides. So how is Salesflare set up to get rid of that frustration? Because that's what I understand, at least the software to be.
Yeah, exactly. No, the issue for salespeople is not so much that they don't want to help their sales manager, like you said, and they understand that, but they don't see how, because the sales manager wants some stuff, that they have to spend an enormous amount of time. They just don't see that balance there. They're like, okay, that's great, but no, we're not going to do this. I mean, it's so much work, and we don't see the point. Maybe there's a point for you, but this just doesn't work. So there's for us, in a salesperson's perspective, there's this balance between amount of work needed, which is usually huge, and not just huge, it's also unrealistic. I mean, somebody I came up that you need to track everything you do and fill out all the information you have and all this kind of things. You can understand theoretically where that comes from, but it's just not realistic that anybody is ever going to do that. So that's the one side of the equation. The other side is that does it help the salesperson also?
Yeah, do I make more sales as a result of doing all this work?
And many systems, when we started, were sort of helping with giving a little overview, but really there wasn't a lot of return, and especially not if you don't fill it out fully and completely. So most of the time they were failing at delivering this value. So you see, like, on the one end, it's like, okay, this is not realistic, it's too much work. And on the other hand, and it also doesn't really help. But then if you fix the data input, if you make sure that the computer can take it over, most of it is done for you, you just have to click a few things, the information is there, then that shifts. Then the system becomes a sort of a brain for you, where you can find everything back without you necessarily organizing everything. It gives you overview, but it can also start doing more than that, because if all that data is there, then you can build on top of it. So some of the things we build on top of that is automated reminders to follow up with a customer if you forgot to do so, automated reminders to answer an email if you've forgotten to answer an email, and we can detect, like, this is an email from a customer, it hasn't been answered, it hasn't been archived, hasn't been deleted, it hasn't been replied to. There's a task. If you do one of these things, then the task is gone. These kind of things. To have a bit more completeness, a thing that our system doesn't do is make meeting notes and put them on the meeting. So if there's a meeting without meeting notes, it will say, hey, there's one here. But then also on top of it, you can create segments, which is very powerful because you have all that data. You can use it to segment and make lists. You can use it to sort things, but you can also use it to also, like, build real automation on top of it, in the sense that you can say, if this and this and this is true, then send that person an email, and then if they reply, you stop, and then we take it over manually. But if they don't reply, you send another email of this form, and within that you can then also insert lots of data points that have been collected to personalize the email. So all these kind of things become possible, which then makes that the input towards a CRM for you as a salesperson is minimized. The output is much bigger, which then makes that it much more likely that you will see the sort of cost benefit thing, and you will actually start using it because it's actually better than a sheet, while not being, and that's another part of the thing, we focus very much on making it very user friendly, in the sense that people one have to understand what it does, and two, it can't be too much work handling the software. If that's all there, then it actually becomes a tool for salespeople, and that's the bottleneck. If then salespeople start using it properly, then everything else that the manager wants, that happens. I mean, the manager has transparency into what's happening, can coach people, sees results. When somebody leaves, can actually pick up again, or when somebody is sick also, can make forecasts. All these kind of things are possible. But now the reason why this didn't exist yet when we started, and that's something I figured when I was doing a lot of customer interviews, was that people were sort of thinking that the issue was not the software, it was the salespeople. So what I heard all the time was like, yeah, I mean, the software could be better for sure, but the software is not the issue. The issue is that salespeople are lazy. So we have the solution for it, and the solution is we don't give them bonus if they don't fill out the CRM, or some would say no, we just fire them if they don't fill out the CRM. You know, you
Yeah,
start
that's what I
building.
was saying. It's like a stick. You got to keep hitting them, to get, yeah,
And at
right.
some point they will do it, but that's also unrealistic and not really, I think, modern pedagogy, or I don't know how to say it in English exactly. Uh, modern way of learning something.
Yeah, pedagogy, yeah.
So yeah.
So what does it do? What does it do that simplifies the life of the salesperson? How does it actually work
Yeah, I'll give you
differently
some.
than?
So I already said a few things that it does based on the data. I'll give a few examples of how it gathers data.
Yeah.
So it connects to your mailbox. It's actually the first thing when you start a trial on the site. It connects to your mailbox, whether you have Google Workspace, formerly called G Suite, or Office 365 or something else. It doesn't really matter. The first two are quicker and more modern and all that. We've built straight onto the API, so it's definitely preferable. But if you have something else, it works as well. Then Salesforce starts synchronizing. It starts going through your emails. It starts seeing who you know. So it detects names and email addresses. But then also in the emails, it goes look like whether these people sent you email signatures, and it picks these up. If it finds the email signature, it parses out the information. So it says like, okay, this is his position, this is his phone number, this is address, this is maybe social profiles in there, all this kind of stuff. And then it calculates connection strengths. So based on the email traffic you're having, it will say, okay, you have a very good connection with this person, a bit less with that person, and it gives these scores. This is not extremely interesting for when it's just you, but when you're working with a team, and afterwards you look at a company and you're like, oh, your colleagues know these people and this person in particular, and it's that person that knows them really well, then it really becomes interesting. Then after you sign up, you can connect your calendar. There it will do the same, but then with meetings. So it pulls in all the meeting information and detects people and all those kind of things. Of course, it also shows the emails and the meetings automatically in the software. That's I think logical. Well, at the moment we started, when we would explain this, and people would be like, "Oh, so all emails will be in the CRM," and then either people would say like, "No, that's not good. You won't want all things in the CRM. It's going to become chaos. We only want the important ones in there because that's what CRM vendors had been selling them, because that's what was technically the case, right?" And then the other thing would be like, what if there is this really sensitive email? Nowadays, we never get these questions, and when we do, we have functionality for hiding emails and all those kind of things. Anyway, um, it connects with your call history on your phone, pulls in calls, matches them up with the phone numbers of people. What happens first, that a person gets a phone number or you call them or whatever, it doesn't matter. It's
Does that include text messages as well?
not currently, no. We sometimes get demand for it, so we might make that, but we don't currently integrate with text messages. We integrate into the Gmail and Outlook itself, also with a sidebar, which shows you all of the information you would find in the CRM, but then next to your email automatically. So you open an email from someone, you see the company, all the people you know there, the opportunities, the timeline, the files you exchange, the social interactions, all these kind of things. So you don't have to switch tabs the whole time. You're not like living in two worlds. You can just do everything from Gmail or Outlook if you like. And at some point, if you really want to focus on your pipeline or so, you go into the CRM. But then it integrates company information from company databases. That's included in your subscription. Like it pulls in a lot of extra information, so you don't have to research that yourself. It actually pulls contact info also to a smaller extent based on publicly available information. So you often get pictures and social profiles and all those kind of things. And then this sidebar also integrates email tracking. So every email you send is tracked with opens and clicks, which then links up to website tracking as well. So when people click a link in an email, it also links that up to the website tracking, which makes that without any effort, basically, you can map your whole sales process, all the emails, the calls, the meetings, the opens of these emails, the clicks they make on them when they go to the website. Every single thing you have as an interaction between you and the customer is mapped automatically. So you don't need to spend your time putting that in. And then when you meet new people, it's also shown on the company. So you're looking at a specific company and it says, well, there's a few more contact suggestions. Do you want to add these people? And then you can say, add this person, add that person, or don't add them, or just add them all. So you don't need to remember all the time, like, oh, I met this new person, let me put them in the CRM.
Yeah, okay, sure. And how does it then integrate with the CRM? Like if you have a CRM already, and you're challenged with, it sounds to me like if you have a CRM already and you're challenged with getting information in there automatically from your sales team, Salesflare does that for you, grabs all that data the way you just described it. How does it get it into? How does it interact with CRM? If I have a CRM, how does it interact with that?
Yeah, that's funny that you asked that, because that's the initial idea we had for Salesflare. We saw a world in which there's these CRMs like Salesforce, for instance, that aren't really used properly. But the thing is, you cannot fix Salesforce for salespeople, because Salesforce is a generic system used by many departments. And the usual solution is to use a specific solution for the group that is using it. So for instance, for support people, you have a thing like Zendesk or so, for instance, or for email marketing, you'd use MailChimp, or for marketing automation, you would have things like Marketo. Every single application floats around the CRM and synchronizes with it. So our idea was, why don't we build a sales platform that is built for salespeople? It's not this kind of generic thing in which the salespeople need to work that doesn't work for them. And that synchronizes with the CRM. Now, we started off with that idea. We contacted some larger companies because that was the target audience for this. And what we found out is that while we thought it wasn't feasible to fix Salesforce, that's exactly what they wanted to do. They didn't want to buy another system, and they were stuck to the idea that their salespeople had to work in Salesforce.
Okay.
And they did have the issue. That was not the point. It was like, okay, this is very nice, but we don't want to buy another system. We want to throw more money at Salesforce, to say it bluntly, or at consultants. And secondly, they also then had their thoughts, which was an additional blocker, like how well is this going to synchronize the two systems? And they didn't have a lot of belief in that. And it's actually when we were stuck in that alley, that we started seeing that what we built appealed more to the startups around us in the incubator, that we said, okay, maybe this is not for enterprises. Maybe it's not a sales platform. Maybe it's a CRM by itself. And it was actually already built that way, sort of. So we started making a standalone CRM. So it's not meant right now to be used next to a CRM or to synchronize it with it. A lot of our customers actually come from Salesforce, small and mid-sized companies that are frustrated with how it doesn't work for them, how much they're paying, their sales team not using it, and them then looking for something that actually works for them, like we discussed. Funny is how many of our larger customers, because we really go from really small companies to mid-sized companies, come with that Salesforce frustration in the back of their heads, or even more top of minds than the back of their heads.
Yeah. So how do you, when you first get started, then it seems to me like you can get up to speed maybe fast, because when you first get started, you've got these tools scraping all this information that's already existing from the salesperson's email, phone, calendar, all that stuff. So you can populate quickly, I'm assuming. And then is there like every day it updates the activity, or how does it work? So start up and then like every day.
It updates live. So the moment you get an email in, especially when you use something like Google Workspace, like Gmail
Yeah.
or Office 365, the moment that an email hits your inbox, it hits our servers as well. And our servers then on the fly update it. So before you even notice, it's updated already. So it's not a daily process that runs or something. Yeah.
And then it's reminding you of things that you need to do with what kind of frequency, or is that adjustable, or what?
That's also live. So for instance, to remind you to follow up, you can say, for instance, like if I'm talking to a company and they're in this stage of the pipeline, then I want to be reminded if I forget to be in touch with them for 5 days or something. At the exact 5 days, a reminder will pop up. So in your tasks section in the software, there's a part suggested tasks. You'll see it pop up there. Plus, if you have that on, of course, we also send out notifications, which is on your phone or your computer or in the notification center in the software. You can see a little notification saying, "Hey, there's this account that is inactive for whatever 6 days." If you said 6 days, is it maybe time to follow up? And then you can click on that, and you're directly in the right place to do the follow up.
Huh. Well, I love what you said. You said our discipline is not the issue anymore, and you sort of said, the computer is much better, essentially disciplined way of grabbing information than relying on a salesperson to have to, at least in their minds, do things that aren't productive to them selling more. That was really, I like, if you use that all the time, that's really good. Our discipline is not the issue anymore. I think that makes a lot of sense. It's a very compelling sales sort of pitch to me, or a way of thinking about what you're doing that's not being done other places.
If you want to make it a bit more abstract, like the whole thing, like the fact that we should manage data as salespeople, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because computers are way better at this management of data. Sometimes there's this finesse where humans know a bit more than the computer and can add something, but that's just in specific cases. And that's why we didn't like created fully automatically. There's places where you accept things, you accept suggestions and reject them and stuff. Because then you can still keep that control, and you know that the computer is not going to mess it all up, but at least it has done most of the work for you, which it can. It just, it can even, like, if one of the things our software does is, like, you get an email with a full name and an email address, it will then even split up that full name in prefix, first name, middle name, last name, suffix and stuff, based on an advanced algorithm. I wouldn't necessarily call it AI, so that you don't have to do these things anymore yourself. In the beginning we didn't do that, but then we started automating, like, emails, and you need a first name if you want to send an email, so then that became really relevant.
I love it. I love what you're doing here. How do people find out more about you or about Salesflare? What do they need to do?
For Salesflare, you can head to salesflare.com. Flare is Flare. You can read about the software there. You can try it. You can actually see it before you try it, even. I mean, before you connect your emails. We have something running like that right now. And then if you connect your emails, you have a trial that starts with 7 days, but that's just to motivate you to earn more days by setting up the software. You get, if you're one user, up to 30 days or so, I think, on the software. And if you're more users, you can get more even for free before you decide to pay for it or not, to see whether it's useful. We have a blog also in which we share a lot of sales advice and all that. And if you want to get in touch with me, LinkedIn is the best place. You can type my name there, Jeroen Corthout. If you find somewhere how to write it, there's only one person with my name, so you won't miss. But when you connect with me, please include a personal message, because otherwise I don't know why you're contacting me, and I will just assume it's spam, because I get a ton of spam every day. But if you do include a personal message, I'll certainly connect with you, and we can have a chat.
All right. Well, Jeroen, thank you so much for being on the show today. It was great to learn all about you. It's funny how much time we spent learning about you before we even got to Salesflare. So I really do appreciate you walking us through all of that, because I think it's really meaningful for people to understand that, things just don't happen. They go, there's these paths, and you obviously went down a bunch of different paths before you ended up here. And I'm sure there's a bunch of paths that you're going to go down from here forward as well. So at least we have a good idea that you're a path maker, I'd say. So thank you so much for being on the show. It's been my pleasure to get to know you.
Yeah, thank you. This was fun. I hope it was fun for the listeners as well. And what you said, indeed, the paths are not always as clear when they're in front of us. I think what Steve Jobs said in his commencement address there was like, it all makes sense looking backwards. Looking forward, like, not so much. That's very much how it is. Like, I even wonder what is my path forward quite often. I really don't know, actually. I mean, for the time being, I'm working on Salesflare. But then from there, I have no idea.
Right. Well, you don't need to know. As long as you're as long as you're making progress towards something, the other things sort of come your way. It's when you stop making progress that things sort of start to shut down.
True. Yeah. It's definitely another piece of advice. Just get going. It's much easier to get to the next thing when you're in movement than to get moving when you're actually in standstill.
Right.
So start something, maybe fail at it, and the next thing will come.
Good advice. Thanks for sharing that with us. Thanks for listening to this episode of the How'd It Happen podcast, where we believe that success doesn't happen unless you make it happen. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. And while you're there, please rate it and leave a comment as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the show, ideas for future guests, or whatever you'd like to share. And of course, you can always find me at mikemalatesta.com. See you next time. Thanks again for listening to the How'd It Happen podcast.